Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's broadcast of the New Haven Symphony. This was to have been the last of our classic series of concerts tonight in Wolsey Hall, a program of Ravel and Mason Bates and Debussy. Obviously, circumstances have changed, but I am very, very happy to welcome tonight as my guests the soloist that would have played Ravel's wonderful Concerto for the left hand, Jeremy Jordan. Jeremy is joining us from his apartment in New York. He and I are having a conversation that we have recorded earlier in the week, and that will be followed by an also pre-recorded recital of about 25 minutes that Jeremy has been kind enough to assemble for us. So with that, welcome indeed, Jeremy Jordan from New York. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm maintaining. What is your life like these days? Is there such a thing as a routine, as a typical day?
Yeah, it's well, things have changed, of course. And the first thing is that I'm just tremendously grateful. I'm very thankful that everything's okay. I'm safe and healthy. Everybody in my family is safe and healthy. And I'm tremendously grateful for that. As far as, musically what's going on, I'm mostly doing a lot of teaching and recording. And so that's been keeping me very busy. I'm really glad that I have a lot of students that are able to transition to this pretty well. I teach courses in music composition, courses in music theory, and all of my students have been able to migrate online. We still have the lectures, we're learning, and we're having a good time. So I'm just tremendously grateful for all of that. How about you? Everything's going okay?
Yeah, it's going very well. I'm out here in San Francisco and balancing my various responsibilities with the orchestras that I lead in New Haven and Marin and Sun Valley Music Festival. So that is paradoxically making me at least as busy as I would be in any other normal week.
Yes.
Which is strange, but that's the way of it. But I'm delighted that you're keeping stimulated with composition and teaching and all of that. That's really good to hear.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, you are in New York now, but you were originally from Chicago. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about your background in Chicago and how you came to New York?
Sure. That's absolutely correct. I was born and raised in Chicago. Most of my family is still living there. Both of my parents were musicians themselves, both pianists and singers. And so they sort of started me when I was very young in music. And, it was a wonderful time, growing up in a musical family. And Chicago is also a tremendously vibrant musical community. So I had a lot of really great friends, people that I still play with to this day, that are, friends that I made back in Chicago. Once I came out of high school, I ended up going to Juilliard, and so I did undergraduate studies there. I did graduate studies there in piano. That was a nice time, and that's how I came to be in New York in the first place. I finished there about 6 years ago now, and so once that happened, I decided to stay in New York. I had sort of planted my roots down here musically, I think, just from being here in school for so long, so it seemed natural, and I've been here ever since. So that's how.
I imagine you must miss your family in Chicago, but are there other aspects of Chicago life that you miss? Because there's two great cities between.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not asking you to choose between the two, but
Chicago's a great town. I think probably the thing I miss about Chicago the most, besides just friends and family and the people, I'd have to say the lakefront. The lakefront is pretty cool. A lot of people that aren't from Chicago don't realize that the whole eastern side of Chicago is just sort of one big coastline along Lake Michigan. So that's especially around this time of year is really kind of the best time to hang out there. So I certainly miss that. Miss friends and family too. But hopefully, fingers crossed, I can get back there soon. So that's my plan.
Oh, absolutely. So, you and I were to have collaborated for the first time on this concert, and obviously I was looking forward to that so much, not least of which was because we were going to be doing the great Ravel Concerto for the left hand, which is a really extraordinary piece of music, and one that I imagine as a pianist as Ravel must be close to pianists' hearts, because Ravel wrote some of the most extraordinary music ever written for piano.
He sure did. No, that's absolutely correct. You know, Ravel is somebody that I admire tremendously, and you know, it's funny that you mentioned this is, you know, really our first time meeting, because I can begin to tell you maybe some things about myself that I don't know if you would have expected, but I always really have considered myself to be a composer first. I've always looked at myself as a composer who happens to use the piano as you know, my primary instrument. But composition is the discipline and the art form, the medium of expression that's closest to my heart. And so because of that, Maurice Ravel is obviously somebody that I hold in extremely high esteem, because his you know, his approach to composition is incredibly academic in many ways. He's very methodical, very careful, very disciplined in his approach to counterpoint, harmony, orchestration, but then also incredibly imaginative in so many ways. And I feel that as a composer, he's one of those people that manages to marry creativity and freedom with discipline and knowledge so well. So, you know, it would have been great. And, you know, the nice thing about the concerto for the left hand, there's always sort of I feel a bit of a stigma that, you know, it's going to be exceptionally difficult. But in some ways, it's actually much more difficult to write than it is to play. To have a piece that sounds so natural and so beautiful with such an incredible physical restriction upon the composer, not the pianist. I mean, for the pianist, I mean, we're playing with our left hands all the time. So, I mean, physically, in many ways, it's the same. But for the composer to still be able to write so naturally and so beautifully with such a restriction is really a marvel. So I was really looking forward to it.
That's a fantastic observation, and never really occurred to me with such clarity as what you just expressed. But absolutely, it's a triumph of Ravel to sort of. I suppose it's a magic trick of sorts to create the impression that in fact there are two, if not more, hands at work, and yet to be able, as you say, to deal with this extraordinary physical restriction, and yet it never sounds for a minute like it's half a piece.
That's right. That's right. It's so incredible. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned in my studies is that that's always the sign of a composer that's of a very high pedigree, because they're able to execute conceptual things that may be incredibly advanced. I mean, for example, someone like a J.S. Bach, where you can have, you know, these incredibly intricate canons, these incredibly intricate fugues, and all sorts of contrapuntal tricks going on. But when you're listening, it just sounds like beautiful music. You're not aware that there's all of these intensely academic processes happening. And so I feel like Ravel certainly did that in this concerto, because just playing it is a joy, listening to it is a joy. And you would never know that he's negotiating all these difficulties. It's really, really pretty cool.
Well, absolutely well said. And just to confirm that one of the reasons we're talking about, you might ask, why are we talking about a piece that we're not doing? Well, you know, at some point when this all blows over, and of course we plan a long way ahead, but I would absolutely intend to have us do this in a future season. So this will be definitely our discussion. We'll have yield something at the end of the day, and I really look forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
You mentioned Ravel as, of course, a composer, and he was a fine pianist, no question, but we know him primarily as a composer. But somebody else that figures in prominently, I think, in your life and your imagination is somebody who most definitely had a foot equally in both camps, and that's Franz Liszt, as one of the great virtuosos of all time, and a titan of a composer as well. Would you talk a little bit about what Liszt has meant to you during your career?
Yes, you know, Franz Liszt, it's always something I say. I feel like I know a lot about him, even though, of course, I've never met him. But just through his music and his approach to pianism, you know, he's an individual that must have been incredibly intelligent. And the reason I say that is because I believe that he approached the piano in some ways from a geometric standpoint. In other words, he believed that he was manipulating physical geometries. In other words, the thing about the piano that's so interesting is that the piano is a digital instrument. It's quantized in many ways. There are keys that you can press, and there's no malleable pitch. So we don't have things like wind players, like vibrato or tone and things like that, or the ability to manipulate a sound continuously. The piano is merely a series of shapes that can be made in different positions, and you're just moving between these different shapes and positions. And someone like Liszt, to me, is someone I believe who totally physically mastered the keyboard. He mastered every possible shape in every possible fingering, and then managed to master the transitions between all of them, and essentially, believe it or not, quite literally finishing the piano, if there's such a thing. He realized that the piano in some ways is a finite conquest, a massive one, but finite. And he finished it. But then what's even more remarkable about that to me is that he then began to use that process to write music, to compose. And that's something that, you know, if I compare it to someone like a Tchaikovsky, or in some facets even a Ravel, they're composing conceptually, like they're using theory, counterpoint, harmony, all of these things. Whereas Liszt is using those things, but he's really just using the piano to write for him. And it's a really unique thing, and something that I think is really underappreciated about him. And it's something that I do all the time. That it's something that I think about all the time when I'm writing music, when I'm playing the piano. So he's had a tremendous impact on me in that way, for sure.
Fascinating. And one other thing that Liszt was renowned for was his arrangements of other people's music and transcriptions and really transformations in some ways, and which actually leads me to the program that you selected for us tonight, because that's something that I think has rubbed on you a little bit, because you're opening with a transcription of a piece by Saint-Saëns. So I wonder if you could tell us about that, as well as the other pieces that you've assembled for us.
Sure. That first piece by Camille Saint-Saëns, it's it's called the Etude in the Form of a Waltz. And it's a wonderful piano piece. It's played pretty frequently, but I think I heard it when I was maybe 15 or 16 years old. And for some reason in my mind, I just decided that I was going to arrange it in a more Lisztian fashion, or just take a pre-existing piano piece and just do things to it. Looking back on it now, it's just, I'm not really sure why I did that. But at the time, I thought it was fun. And so it was really my first sort of foray into transcribing and arranging. So I opened with that. It's a lot of fun. And, you know, I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope everybody loves watching and listening to it, because it's fun to play. It's just a fun piece. And, you know, the thing about it, too, with playing those things, it was meant, I think, at the time to be sort of a challenge for me, pianistically as well, like an exercise that I could do. So it's like, you know, I would a lot of times play it every day as a warm-up. So, you know, opening the program with that, I think mentally for me is kind of just going back to my old warm-ups when I was, you know, practicing in conservatory every day. So that's the first thing I used to play every day. So that's the first thing you get to hear. And then the other pieces are sort of inspired by a Lisztian program, I suppose, in a way. One of the things that was cool about Liszt is that, at least to my understanding, he was one of the first people to perform music that he didn't write. You know, up until then, I think sort of most piano performances were, you would expect to hear the composer's compositions and then maybe hear the composer improvise on themes or something like that. Whereas Liszt was the first kind of person to really popularize this idea of a recital, where he's like, you know, I'm going to play some music that I wrote, but I'm also going to play some music that other people wrote, and I'm also going to improvise a little bit. So that's what I kind of tried to do in this evening. I'm playing some music that I wrote and arranged, playing some music by other people, and then improvising a little bit. So after that, I played the Shogun Polonaise, the C-sharp minor, number 1. I just picked it because I love the piece. I think it's beautiful. I think of every composer besides perhaps Bach, Chopin has had the greatest influence on me. I love the piece, so I just hope you guys like it too. After that, I play a mazurka that I actually wrote. And I kind of juxtaposed, I suppose, those things, the idea of Chopin and also a mazurka together. But it's actually a very small piece that I wrote from a collection of pieces called children's songs. These little songs that I wrote for young pianists to get into more technical things. So it's a short piece, and I love it a lot. After that, I do the Bach C minor Fantasy. That's a piece that actually I first heard when I was really, really little. It's a lot of fun, a lot of crossing hands, but also the reason I included it is because Bach is, as I just mentioned, the largest influence on me as a composer. And it's just kind of amazing to see all of the cool things that he does with two voices, just one voice in this hand, one voice in this hand, and they just play back and forth together for a few minutes. It's really quite beautiful. And the last piece is for the improvisation. That's probably one of my favorite jazz ballads ever. It's called Monk's Mood by Thelonious Monk, a pianist and composer that I could rave about for hours. Really, really a genius. I played it to the best of my ability, and I think that the beauty of it speaks for itself. He's really just a gem of a composer. So I hope you guys enjoy it. It's a bit of an eclectic mix of music. But like I said, I put it together. I was like, I'll try to do some things that I wrote, try to do some things that other people have written, and then try to do a little bit of improvisation just to, have a little bit of fun with things that I'm practicing here every day. So I hope you guys like it.
Well, it's a fascinating glimpse into your musical mind, a very thoughtfully curated assemblage of pieces, and it looks incredibly interesting on paper, and I've had the chance of listening to your pre-recorded version as well, and so it's really, really terrific. So I want to thank you. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yes.
Making music together. That can't come soon. And
I'm looking forward to it too. It's going to be wonderful.
Absolutely. But in the meantime, many, many thanks for your conversation and for your music making. And ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Jordan.
Thank you for having me. Enjoy.